Breaking news. Things are heating up behind the scenes with the Miami Dolphins, and we need to talk about something that could become very important for this roster. We all know the cornerback position can completely change a defense, and Miami cannot afford to ignore an opportunity to get better right now. Mekhi Blackmon has just been waived by the Indianapolis Colts, and suddenly the Dolphins have a decision to make. Some fans will look at his experience, his tackling ability, and his physical style, and say Miami should absolutely put in a waiver claim. Others will look at his struggles in coverage and say the Dolphins should trust the corners already on the roster. I want to know which side you're on. Would you bring Mekhi Blackmon to Miami, or would you stay with guys like Ethan Bonner, Marco Wilson, Alex Austin, A.J. Green, and Miles Battle? Write your opinion in the comments. And if you've been a Miami Dolphins fan for more than 15 years, hit that like button hard, because with roster cuts getting closer and John Eric Sullivan continuing to make moves, this Dolphins roster may still look very different very soon. So, let's talk about Mekhi Blackmon and why Miami could seriously consider adding him. The Miami Dolphins are still working on this roster, and General Manager John Eric Sullivan has made another addition as the team reaches the end of training camp. Miami has added running back Coleman Bennett, an undrafted rookie who spent part of this summer with the Chicago Bears, and there's actually a pretty cool South Florida connection behind this move. Bennett is from Fort Lauderdale, and he is the son of former Miami Hurricanes running back Donnell Bennett. Coleman Bennett is 5'11" and 185 pounds. He is not a huge running back, but he plays with a physical style, and his college production gives us an idea of what Miami is bringing into the building. Last season at Kennesaw State, Bennett carried the ball 157 times for 764 yards, averaging 4.9 yards per carry, and scored 4 rushing touchdowns. He also contributed as a receiver, catching 27 passes for 314 yards and 3 touchdowns. Before Kennesaw State, he had also spent time at Rice, and he began his college career at Bucknell. Bennett already received an opportunity with Chicago this summer. During the preseason, he had 4 carries for 10 yards, including a 3-yard touchdown against the Cleveland Browns. Now that opportunity moves to Miami, and considering where we are on the calendar, this looks much more like a depth and insurance move than some major change to the running back room. There is an important reason for that. Donovan Edwards was not at Dolphins practice because of an injury. Edwards had been working down the depth chart at running back, so adding Bennett gives Miami another healthy player at the position as the Dolphins prepare for the final preseason game. That matters because the team still needs enough bodies to get through the game without putting unnecessary pressure on other players. So I would not look at the Coleman Bennett signing and suddenly assume something dramatic is happening. Based on the situation described around the move, this is a low-risk addition that helps Miami get through the final stage of the preseason while giving Bennett another NFL opportunity. But considering that he is a Fort Lauderdale native and the son of a former Hurricanes running back, there is definitely a local connection that makes the story a little more interesting. Unfortunately, Edwards was not the only player missing from practice. Rookie linebacker Jacob Rodriguez also did not participate. That is something worth monitoring because Rodriguez had participated the previous day, meaning whatever kept him out appeared to be a new issue. There was no indication in the information available that this is something serious, so there is no reason to panic. But anytime a rookie who has been getting valuable training camp work suddenly misses practice, you pay attention. Miami was already dealing with several other absences. Zach Sealer, Kenneth Grant, Ben Sims, Will Kachmarek, and Ronnie Harrison were among the players not practicing again. So while the Dolphins are approaching the end of camp, they are also trying to manage a roster that has several players dealing with physical issues. And this was not just another practice. This was the final training camp practice open to the media. In fact, according to the information coming out of the session, the media will not be at another Dolphins practice until next May. So this was the last chance for a long time to get this type of open look at what was happening on the practice field. The good news is that the offense apparently looked better than it did the day before. Malik Willis had a much sharper practice. During red zone work, Willis connected with Caleb Douglas for a touchdown and also found other players for scores. That was encouraging because the Dolphins' offense had struggled badly in the previous practice. One day does not answer every question, especially during training camp, but seeing improvement is exactly what you want. If the offense has a poor day, and comes back the following practice looking cleaner and more productive. That response matters. Willis was better. Miami found the end zone, and the overall picture was not nearly as ugly as it had been one day earlier. Quinn Ewers, however, continued to have problems. Ewers threw an interception to safety Major Burns during red zone work, and Burns is becoming one of the more interesting players to watch as the Dolphins move toward the final roster decision. The report was that Burns could have taken the interception roughly 100 yards for a touchdown if the play had continued normally. In other words, this had the potential to become a pick six. For Burns, that is exactly the type of play a player fighting for a spot needs at this point in camp. There are only so many opportunities left to convince the coaching staff that you belong on the 53-man roster. An interception in the red zone, especially one with the possible return all the way for a touchdown, gets attention.
For Ewers, it was another difficult moment at a time when every quarterback rep is being watched closely. Miami does not have unlimited time left to evaluate these players. The preseason is almost finished, roster cuts are approaching, and mistakes become harder to ignore when there are fewer practices and fewer games remaining. There was also a touchdown from Devon Achane during practice, but one of the moments that probably made Dolphins fans most nervous involved rookie wide receiver Chris Bell. Bell was targeted on a deep pass, became tangled up during the play, and went down. Considering what he has been working his way back from, that is obviously the type of scene that can immediately make people nervous. But this time, the result was encouraging. Bell got back up. He remained in practice. He continued working as though nothing had happened. That might seem like a small detail, but for a player returning from a knee injury, moments like that can become important parts of the process. Practicing without contact is one thing. Running routes is one thing. But eventually, a player has to experience an awkward fall, contact, or some unexpected movement and find out how the knee responds. Bell got one of those tests, and he passed it well enough to stay on the field. That does not necessarily mean he is completely back to his old self yet. There have been people around the team who believe Bell may still be operating somewhere around 75 to 80% and that his speed or quickness coming in and out of cuts has not completely returned. The important thing is that he continues getting more comfortable and continues increasing his workload. And confidence is a huge part of this. A player can be medically cleared, but there is still a difference between knowing the knee is healthy and trusting it without thinking during a football play. Every route, every cut, every fall, and every time Bell gets back up without a problem can help him reach that point. So while nobody should pretend one practice means everything is completely finished with his recovery, what happened was another positive step. But now we get to what might become the most interesting roster